Hey YouTubers, Nicholas Matovich with Strasbourg 1991 Productions here. This is for Literary Gladiators for Josh and Ari and the rest of Literary Gladiators. I am very glad to be back here. It's been a while since I did another video of a magazine haul. I don't usually do magazine hauls, or like they basically are the headlines or what they call it. I actually got a magazine I think it would be very unique, characteristic, but overall it's a what they call the real deal versions of the spooky and the mysterious. And today I will show you one of the few titles I actually have in this chapter magazine of People Edition of some of the creepiest when it comes to crime and punishment. Ever since the 1970s through 1990s, crime has become an ultimate fantasy, and there's been a lot of copycat recreations of movies that were based off of the true stories of these events. And some of them actually made it to America's Most Wanted, who was hosted by John Walsh, who founded NCMEC, which I'll explain to you at the end of the video. But it was basically, when he started America's Most Wanted, it's because he lost his son Adam, his 6-year-old son, back in, I believe, October of 1981, to, he was kidnapped and gruesomely murdered by Otis Toole. He died in federal prison. The case was a very mistaken, inconsistent investigation. Poor detective work, lack of training, lack of intuition, emphasis, etc. It took 27 years to find out that Otis Toole was the mastermind of the murder of Adam Walsh in 1981, which Code Adam and department stores all over the country and all around the world had become a global phenomenon. And I think protecting children and protecting the weak and the vulnerable have been a very incredible goal for law enforcement for all across the country and all over the world. One of the stories that I was actually inspired by was from the 1960 through early to mid 70s. If you never seen the True Crime Unsolved Mysteries of a special edition of People magazine, it'll actually show to you some of the craziest of mysteries. As you can see, one of the mysteries that was featured on FBI's include from scandalous murders and obstruction of justice. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey obviously was one of the most inspired, but also one of the most darkest and most mysterious of exactly who actually kidnapped and murdered JonBenet Ramsey at the time on December 25th of 1996. I was actually at Richard L. Rice School at the time when this incident broke out. Now compared to when I went to Robert B. Jaggard in 97, 98, and then the year after was the Columbine attack. There's also another suspect. There's a possibility that the Zodiac killer, who was known for causing his messages with the FBI, Secret Service, and CIA, became one of the most infamous of serial killers in the West Coast. People thought it was Arthur Lee Allen, who was already serving time for aggravated indecent battery, but his DNA was not connected and did not match the form of Zodiac. There were other names like Ross Sullivan. Recently, interestingly enough, there is a possibility the name Earl Van Best might be the actual Zodiac killer, because at the time when he was dating a former girlfriend of his, I think it was around the 1967 or so, that he began to take advantage. And there were lots of killings in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of them with aggravated indecent battery, which I couldn't say it, but indecent batteries, and two of the victims were, almost all the victims were female in their teens to early mid-20s over the years. There's a good possibility Earl Van Best could be the mastermind, because his great step-nephew at the time was doing a story on how his uncle Earl abandoned him after he was involved in a trafficking operation. We don't know if it was related to human trafficking, sex trafficking, whatever. But he was also notorious to be a heavy alcoholic. At the time, his domestic violent behavior spiraled out of control, and for the last 50 years, he hasn't been actually identified. But there are possibilities that very 99% chance that Earl Van Best will be confirmed through DNAs through FBI field lab operatives. But one of the stories I was actually also mentioning was something called Catastrophe on Christmas Day, which is a very non-fictional story about a gentleman named Robert Enyart, who was a pastor at the school where JonBenét Ramsey was in a beauty... well, actually, it was her mom at the time who was a pageant. But it actually turned out that he was a very unusual but also very predatory violator, which I won't go into that. But looking from FBI operatives and not informants, but like operatives and who want to give out confident information and possibility of solving the case. The JonBenét Ramsey case for 25 years now actually has been one of the most darkest and most mysterious murder mysteries. One of the coldest cases the FBI hasn't solved in 25 years up to that point. But I actually got another book. It was called Britney's Last Battle, which is basically based off of the it was actually it was a private film. It was not really couldn't be released because of the day of the incident. So the person who actually stars is a girl named Brittany Zeller. She's in her 20s, lives in Arizona with her dad Gregory, and she comes home. I hate to use the term beaten like beaten like a rag doll, but it's exactly what happened. She actually had so much, I couldn't even describe it to you, but just cut up badly. And when her dad confronted the attack, her abuser, who was actually an alcoholic named Zane Keel Mason, he got into a heated argument and gruesomely murdered her dad in cold blood. Can't go into details, just too gruesome, but he was just emptied out, splashed everywhere. So, but just to be on the safer side, the good part is the U.S. Marshals added him to the top 15 list and put the UFAP, meaning unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, which means if you are accused of a crime and you flee the state to avoid your questioning, you become a federal fugitive almost immediately. They have to be subpoenaed, which means they have to be authorized by other lessees in law enforcement with federal authorities at the time. And a lot of it was they did not know how bad Brittany Zeller would actually live to see, but she actually did survive it. But her dad was not fortunate. So, and Zane Keel Mason was actually added to the Dirty Dozen list because of the gruesomeness and the disgust of the level of the murderous assault. John Walsh actually added something called a 50 Fugitive 50 State when he was on America's Most Wanted, and it's before they shut down from original production in 2012. They actually were one of the first people from AMW to actually capture Zane Keel Mason because of a sting operation. Now, the film Brittany's Final Battle actually was originally going to be starred Alfred Molina as Zane Keel Mason, Cameron Diaz as Brittany Zeller, Bob Gooten as Gregory Zeller, Demi Moore as somebody named Savannah, which I think she was a classmate of hers, and I would definitely say that Robert De Niro was playing John Walsh as the host of America's Most Wanted. This is almost exactly the similar story to Finding Elizabeth, which was a part of NCMEC, which stands for National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She was held captive against her will for almost 2 years, and she was released and safely returned around 2003 or so. The people who kidnapped her are now serving life sentences in federal prison. So, but there was another story I remember getting off on one of the radio shows, and actually it was a very, very interesting film. This one's called Wrong. Sorry, Wrong Number. It's actually a very I'm not talking about comedy. This is more of a drama film. This is basically about phone freaking over since 1991. This was actually a true story of a gentleman's operate. It was basically an operation to catch James Abel Clark, who he was a phone freaker at the time. And basically, what phone freaking is you're actually emptying the coin slots out of payphones, and you're also can mean you're unlawfully entering a third party conversation without consent from the leasee of the head of the CEOs. He basically swindled and basically phone freaked and fenced over quarter to $500,000 in coins, and systems like Bell System, US West, Verizon, they were losing thousands, almost hundreds of millions of dollars in money, and they lost a lot of money in those attacks. Basically, interestingly enough, phone freaking actually has the same penalty if you were convicted of bank robbery without causing bodily harm. It's the same federal prison sentencing of like 25 years, if you're not exactly familiar with it. But the other story I remembered was a story in the 80s about a gentleman named Little Nicky Carrazzo, who was notoriously one of the biggest mob bosses in the world. Worse than Whitey Bulger, worse than Al Capone or any drug lord. He was clearly the worst of the worst. If you actually go back to 91, I mean, his loan sharking operations to pay somebody at a unlawfully high interest. And he basically had his Gambino crime family, that's the mafia, to organize vault vacuums, which basically is the term for, it's a brutal federal combination of money laundering and bank robbery. What a vault vacuum does is they rob the banks. Basically what they do is they rob the banks inside and out, from the cashier. They actually, from the registers to the safes, the vaults, even the coin arcades are robbed and completely emptied. Nothing is left out of the building. They empty pretty much the whole building. And they also do what they do is hungry water, which is like a pretty much like a class 0 acid. Which what they do is they actually, when the dye pack explodes, usually there's a dye pack in the safe that'll explode. And what the bank robbers would do is put hungry water in a rubber tub, which will actually clean this almost 100% of the dye completely off the money after it's been laundered. This was actually a true story of Nicky Carrazzo, but there were also copycat stories of Ernest Avery and John Bronson, who were exactly those same people who robbed banks and laundered cash for their organized criminal business. But I mean, there's like maybe one book left. It's like private ownership. It's like a private copy, and I think those books go up to maybe a very expensive, a little over $20,000. Which are just rare. You could find on the market. So, but other than that, I just don't have a whole lot of other ideas of crime and punishment. But I'm actually going to start off a brand new series. Actually, this one's going to be totally different. It's called Wrong Track, Wrong Area, which is basically about the history of Operation Lifesaver and the dangers of crossing evasion and safety and preventing fatal accidents at grade crossings. So that's all I have to say for right now. Until then, Nicholas Medovich with Strasburg 1991 Productions. Peace out.